Hello everybody, welcome back. Let's jump straight into another letter here. So let's read this task out. You are applying for a job and need a letter of reference from someone who knew you when you were at college. Write a letter to one of your old teachers asking for a reference. In your letter, say what job you have applied for, explain why you want this job, and suggest what information the teacher should include. Now, one of the first things you might be wondering is why I've chosen to place this letter in the semi-formal category, but let's just think about that in a moment. The first thing, as always, we want to do is the keywords, and then we consider the category, the tone that we should be using, because when we identify those keywords, it gives us a better indication as to the appropriate tone. So what we're doing is we're applying for a job and we need a letter of reference. So we're not writing a letter of reference, but we need a letter of reference from someone who knew you when you were at college. So someone who knew you. That knew you part is quite important. That will play into the tone that we need to adopt when we were at college. Okay, so write a letter to one of your old teachers asking for a reference. So this is a request letter, but it's a very specific kind, a little bit different to many other request letters. It's asking for a reference. And in our letter, we need to say what job we've applied for. So give some details about that job. Explain why you want the job. And suggest what information the teacher should include. We might want to give a reason as to why they would include that as well. So what information the teacher should include. Notice as well the verbs here: say, give the job, explain, pretty self-explanatory, just explaining why you want it. But look at verbs like suggest, they're quite key as well. We're not telling the teacher what to include. That would be a little bit rude, but we're suggesting. And the way that we use language to address this task directive is important. We need to make sure we're using suggestion language, not demand language, not instructional language, but suggestion language. We'll talk about that a bit later. So we've got those keywords down, and as I mentioned a moment ago, the next step is to identify what tone we should be using, and it's a little bit confusing here, but we should be using a semi-formal tone. Let's look at why that is. So the first thing is that we're writing a letter of reference. That may sound like we should be taking a formal tone, a more business-like approach. We need to be more professional. And while that is undoubtedly true, we should be trying to be a bit professional. We're also dealing with someone who knew us when we were younger. This is not a business setting, it's not a work setting, it's an education setting. They had maybe more of a stronger, closer relationship with them. That's why we're asking them for a reference, because we feel that they knew us quite well. That's why it's key that we look at that part of the task. Someone who knew us. It's one of our old teachers. So there is a sense of a closer relationship there. We don't want to be so cold and so distant and so formal that it ends up coming across as a little bit transactional. You do this for me because I studied with you. We want to offer an element of warmth there, an element of conviviality. That will actually improve our chances of having a good reference written for us as well. We don't feel like we are just using the teacher. No, we should really be trying to be a little bit conversational as well. We don't want to overdo it, but this is why it should be more semi-formal than formal. But at the same time, if you imagine from informal to semi-formal to formal, it is not just three separate categories, but it is a sliding scale, and there are many different points on it. This letter is probably going to be more towards the formal than towards the informal, hopefully for obvious reasons. Okay, so semi-formal letter, and it's a letter of request, but as I said, a very specific request, a reference request. That's quite important. So let's think about the plan. As usual, P2, P3, and P4. And in P2, I am going to say what job I've applied for. That is the direction here. That is the directive. So let's imagine that the job that we've applied for is as, I don't know, a software engineer. And we can maybe give some details about the role itself or the company. We might be specifically working in app development for a company that, I don't know, focuses on developing and marketing apps. Maybe we can come up with a name as well, but we can do that later. In the third paragraph, we're going to explain why we want the job, and we could say that we want the job maybe because this particular company is focused not just on software development, but also on business development as well. Maybe this is something that we have a passion in. So we're good at software engineering, but we also have a passion for the business side of things. And we can say that we want to take this role on so that we can improve our skills in that particular area. So we can think about that later. And the final paragraph is going to be suggest what information the teacher should include. Here's a nice transition here. So we've got this idea about business and improving skills. Maybe this is the point where we can mention that this was actually our business development teacher. Maybe it was a particular module that we took as part of our course. Maybe an extracurricular module. We were doing in general some sort of computer related course, but there was a business module to take on top of that. So we can say that this was a business development teacher. So it's important for him to say that we were interested in business, because it gives our claim that we are interested in business more authority, more weight. Okay, so that's okay there. Let's come into the letter. Again, as always, think about how you're going to start this letter. Do you think it makes sense to write a first name, a short form of a first name, a full name, just a surname after a Mr. or Mrs.? I would go with what you would call your teacher back when you were at college. And for me, it would be something just like this. Dear Mr. Let's say it's Dear Mr. Kramer. So Dear Mr. Kramer. The first thing here, again, a semi-formal letter. And this is where we're kind of moving into the slightly more informal, but still polite, still professional. I'm going to write, I hope you are well. This is someone that we spent a lot of time with in the past. It is not a cold and anonymous relationship. There is a sense of familiarity here. So it's important that we write something like, I hope you are well. And I am going to follow that up with the reason that I'm writing. Let's remind the person of who I am. And it's important here that I provide sufficient detail so that I jog the teacher's memory, so that he's absolutely sure about who I am, so he can write an appropriate and accurate reference. I was a second year student in your computer science class of 2015, although I'm not sure about this because we talked about him being a business development teacher. So let's just change that to I was a second year student in your business development class of 2015 for my computer science qualification. I'm not sure at this point where it says that we were at college. It doesn't say university. Admittedly, in America, college, university, similar things. Are they the same thing? But I can use qualification because that keeps me from being inaccurate. So I was a second year student in your business development class of 2015 for my computer science qualification. Okay, that's made it very clear who I am. And I am writing to you now to ask for a letter of reference. Now this is probably the longest first paragraph that I will write, perhaps to the degree that I would actually split that into 2 paragraphs. Part of the reason being is that these are 2 entirely different topics here as well. I think it looks better separated. It's not often that I will write 2 introductory paragraphs, but here, this is a special case. Try not to stick too rigidly to any particular rules. There will always be exceptions, and I feel like this is a case for an exception because we want to be polite first of all, but we also need to make sure that we introduce ourselves appropriately. It's not part of the task directive, but it makes sense to do so in a letter of this type. The person hasn't seen us in a long time. We need to be sure that they know who we are, and then we also need to be clear about the reason that we're writing, and we have that at the end there. I'm writing to you now to ask for a letter of reference. Okay, so that order is important as well. Usually I recommend starting with the I am writing to you, but in this case, the reference is dependent on the professor knowing who we are, and so knowing who we are is more important, and so that comes first. Let's move into the first paragraph for the actual bullet point directives. Say what job you have applied for. Well, let's change that around a bit and explain why we need the reference. It's kind of the same thing. You'll have seen I introduce a lot of paragraphs in this kind of way. What happened was that, the reason is that, etc. I could just say, I need this reference because, but this way of introducing a paragraph allows the reader to feel more prepared for the content that is going to arrive. The reason I need this reference is that I have applied for a position, as we've said, as a software engineer. Now, you can capitalize these. It's not absolutely essential, and it really depends on what job you're applying for a lot of the time. For example, a position as a teacher, if you were to capitalize teacher, that would look a little bit strange because it's not specific enough. But if you were to write a biology teacher, then you might capitalize the B and the T in biology teacher because there is a specific role there. We'll do the same thing here. Let's imagine it's a startup. Again, we're going to use some nice vocabulary here, topic related vocabulary. A startup technology company. You may get away with writing tech company just because it's such a strong collocation, startup tech company. But in this case, I think it's just veering towards being too informal. So I'm going to say a startup technology company. Where is it? Let's imagine it's in London, and let's give it a name. Let's call it Power Russ. Again, just important because we want to provide sufficient detail so that the teacher can include all of this detail in his reference letter. It's very important. This is why a reference request letter is different to your general request letter. It needs to be high in detail. Okay, let's give him a little bit of detail about the company itself. So we talked about it being an app development. This is a company which, so we can use a defining relative clause here. Nice bit of grammar. Focuses on developing apps, maybe even marketing apps as well, all together, because we want to think about that business side. Developing and marketing apps for, here's a nice bit of vocabulary. Fledgling businesses. Now, a fledgling is a noun, which basically means a young bird, but we can also use it as an adjective to mean new, inexperienced a lot of the time. They've just started up, so we can use it as a collocation with businesses to talk about new businesses, businesses that need to get off the ground, like a bird getting off the ground to try and fly. So apps for fledgling businesses, and let's just explain what the role would be. And my role would be in, well, we just say app development because we didn't mention it a moment ago. We said developing apps, app development would add there. Okay, we can move into the next paragraph. That seems to be plenty long enough to me. And explain why you want this job. Okay, So why did we even look for this? Let's use this nice phrasal verb here. I sought out. I searched for. I seek in the past. So I sought out this role specifically due to the company's, or we could even say powers. Now notice the apostrophe there ends with an S, so we say S apostrophe. Reported expertise. So we've heard about this expertise that they have with business and in helping people to improve their business skills, or business management, if you will. Reported expertise in business management. So that's quite clear. Now I want to take this moment here to really stress the fact that this is a semi-formal letter by creating a shared memory between me and the teacher that is relevant to the letter and is relevant to the reference request. You may remember from our classes that you can then give some information that is going to be relevant to your reference request, that is going to help your reference, your chances of getting a job. So our classes that I showed a great interest in, as I said earlier, some slightly informal language, but nothing too informal, the business side of the computing industry, and bringing it to more formal language. A great interest in the business side of the computing industry. And what have we got down here? Improve skills. Let's bring that in here. And it is my hope. You could say I hope, but this just adds a layer of complexity here. It is my hope that my business, a nice noun here, acumen, knowledge, expertise, abilities, all of that combined in one word really. Business acumen can improve. So we're trying to improve our skills, improve our business acumen, can improve to the level of my technical abilities, let's say, which means my app development abilities. Okay, let's end that paragraph there. In fact, I will add a bit more. The letter is already a bit long, but I want to link this back more strongly to the previous sentence. I want to create a more logical link, and to do that I'm going to add this. If selected for this position, you'll see that I'm missing an I am. That's okay, we can omit that. It's not absolutely essential, it's understood, so we can drop that there. We have a conditional sentence here as well, which improves the complexity, improves the grammatical range, but more importantly, now that I've added this, I'm making the point that I can improve my business skills only if I get this position, and that is why I looked for this role. That is why I want this job. So you're just tying things together, you're just strengthening your point, and you're really developing your idea and making sure that you improve your marks in coherence and cohesion and task achievement. But we do have quite a long letter now, so let's move into the next paragraph, hopefully not take too long with it. So we want to mention the fact, as we suggest what information the teacher should include, we want to mention the fact that this is our business development teacher. So, as my business development teacher, I feel, I believe, I think, I believe sounds better, it sounds a bit more professional. I believe that so we're talking about that we have a claim, maybe we've claimed to the company already in an interview that we're interested in business, but it would be good if he confirmed this for us, and the noun of confirm, confirmation. I believe your confirmation of my interest in business, or let's mix it up a bit, let's have a bit of lexical range. Let's say corporate life. I believe your confirmation of my interest in corporate life, a nice collocation there as well, would strongly influence the success of my application. Okay, we could end the letter here because it's already quite long. We're on oh, it's not as long as I thought it was. It's 166. So we could go a little bit longer if we want to, but we also want to add at the end that we want to thank the teacher for their help, as always with the reference letter, a request letter. Thank you for your help. We'll keep it nice and simple, but you also could say your help is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for your help. Don't overdo it. You don't want to give this sort of a thank you for your cooperation. It sounds too much like a formal letter that you're writing to a business. It sounds quite cold. So I wouldn't add that there, but thank you for your help is perfectly fine. If you did want to add another sentence at the end here, if you felt like you needed to flesh out that paragraph a bit more because it was a bit short on detail, we might add like another point that you could include to improve the success of your application. Let's say, again, we'll create a shared memory. I remember that I had an excellent record of attendance. It's obviously very important for a job if you can show that you turn up and that you are reliable. So I am sure that a reference to this, now notice this word reference, we're using it in a different way to a letter of reference. We're saying I'm sure that if you refer to this, if you talk about this, and I am sure that a reference to this would also, and some nice colloquial idiomatic vocabulary here as well. Not so idiomatic that it's inappropriate, but hold me in good stead basically means that it would be very beneficial for me. You can also say stand me in good stead as well. So hold me or stand me in good stead. It would put me in a good position. Okay, and then of course I think we can end the paragraph, end the letter now, and I would just end this with a best regards. Make sure you add the full name here. Let's go with Harvey Mead. Okay, so then the teacher, you don't have to add that up here, by the way. You don't have to say, I hope you are well, my name is Harvey Mead. Looks a bit strange, particularly because they know you. They're just not aware of who's writing to them yet. So they can just quickly glance down to the bottom of the letter and then carry on with the letter. That will happen quite a lot. So don't feel like you have to add the name twice. And that is that for a letter of reference, a request for a reference from a college professor. Hopefully that was useful for you. Have a look at the gap fill exercise as always now, and I will see you in the next lecture.